Hey, welcome to Tangible Takeaways, episode 149. I'm Jackson, and today I'm going to talk about how Paul made me a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, Satan blocked their way? What's going on there?
And I'm Todd, and I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how sometimes God can't teach us what we need to learn any other way than through a season of confusion.
All that and more on this episode of Tangible Takeaways. Hey, welcome to Tangible Takeaways, episode 149. We got Pastor Todd in the house today.
Hey, you're just wanting to hear if 149 is a prime number or not.
That's what we're getting
I'm
used
pretty
to.
sure it is.
Yeah. Feeling confident.
Yeah, feeling pretty good about this one.
In the spirit of Aaliyah last week, leave it in the comments if you think 149 is a prime number. Man, Aaliyah's takeover didn't last very long. I'm back.
You're back.
So I'm back. It didn't last long. Excited to get to be with you and unpack a message here from our Kingdom Cultural series that, as we were talking off camera, I think the whole back half of 1 Thessalonians is going to get a lot more normal to preach. And hopefully people who are tuning in each week aren't feeling how strenuous it is almost for us to try to unpack these passages. But this has been like a hard series to preach through because there's so much, I think you said it well to me a week ago, there's so much descriptive things about the opening here to 1 Thessalonians when we're used to, especially in an epistle, a letter from Paul, we're used to a lot of prescriptive. Exactly. You should, this is going to be good for you, or you can grow in this area, or why are you doing, or whatever. And so a lot of like just very clear things. This is a lot of like, you remember how you received what I said, and you remember how I was with you. And we're all sitting here like, well, we weren't.
Wasn't there.
Yeah, we weren't there for that. So I don't remember any of that, Paul. So it's a weird one it feels like, this is a weird word to use, but it's almost a little voyeuristic, like the opening to 1 Thessalonians, where you're kind of looking in on this relationship between church planter, apostle, and fresh group of believers. And you're just getting a window into their relationship, which is cool. Yeah. But then it's also like, and what does that mean for us? It leaves.
How do I
that.
relate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, so you've got in this passage a really interesting statement about, really kind of between the last couple of passages, a couple of interesting statements about the enemy and kind of some of this, getting into a very almost spiritual view of the world that Paul has. And it got me thinking, he says really powerfully in this passage, Satan blocked my way. Yeah. And that gives me, it's weird because it's the Bible, but that gives me a immediate pause because I am used to people saying things like that in a very just hyper spiritual view of the world in general. Yeah. Like I honestly think I've heard somebody talk about how hard of a day they've had and that Satan blocked them from getting a parking spot in, the grocery store parking lot. Sure. And then Satan sparked a conflict with their spouse. And it's just, they see Satan like throwing bombs into their life all day long. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, I don't believe that's true, right? And not because I don't believe that Satan's not real, but I believe that Satan is a real person who is finite and real spiritual being that's finite, doesn't have unlimited knowledge or power or resource. And so I remember a preacher saying one time, and this like shook me up, like Satan probably doesn't know your name. And I thought, that's crazy. He was like, dude, he's working on world leaders and like there are way more important people that Satan is focusing on. Yeah. And there's probably almost certainly a demon that knows your name that's, sure, working under that. But I mean, he's working at like the world structure level. And so I hear that and I get hesitant because it feels like and I know Paul doesn't have a hyper spiritual view, but he has a spiritual view. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on, that's a long preamble intro to this, but I'm wondering your thoughts on that tension, because I think for us, maybe at High Desert Church with our, deep Baptist roots, we might tend to lean towards, I'm not going to spiritualize anything, sure, so there's good growth for us in this passage of like, no, there's times where Satan actually does block your way. or involves himself in some way. But then at the other side, how do I find a tension point where I'm also not hyper spiritualizing? So that was, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I really appreciated in this passage from this last weekend that there was that kind of overt, there's spiritual battle, spiritual warfare going on. And it gives us now the opportunity to go, what of that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do we just read over that? Like, because I'd said it this weekend. I think that most of us would have come to the conclusion, man, we're having a hard time getting back to where you are physically to make the travel or whatever. And the weather's bad. The road's washed out. That's what we would typically, our tribe, blame things on. And we might even be able to see at a perspective that maybe at some level, there is some kind of maybe spiritual engagement as to why that is. But I don't think often we would say things like Satan blocked our way.
I might even quicker go to, it's just not been God's will. It doesn't seem. I might quicker go there than
give the assessment that way.
Yeah.
Knowing that we're rightfully so big on God's sovereignty and his ability to make things happen according to his will. Maybe it's not God's will that we go, but right. He does not give God the responsibility for why he can't get there. He also doesn't chalk it up to just challenges.
Yeah.
He calls it spiritual battle. Satan is doing this. So I think, when we talk about applying that to our lives, there are a lot of tensions. And I think what I have found is that there are probably some good litmus test questions I can ask that I'm sure Paul would have prior to ever making that statement. Because like we see, think of it this way. In the realm, if we read scripture historically from the beginning, obviously the Old Testament isn't completely in chronological order, but from the Old into the New, outside of like some prophetic stuff in Daniel, there's very little talk of the role of Satan, Job, the beginning of Job, but just not a whole lot there throughout scripture. Then you get to the New Testament, the Gospels, and there's like spiritual
it ramps up, by the time
possession and everything going on, and Jesus is talking to demons and the whole thing. So it's like, whoa, that is real. And then now Paul's letters at times are going to either this is just a quick comment. He doesn't explain it. Well, let me tell you about Satan and how he blocks us. Just like Satan blocked our way. Matter of fact, So even like scriptural revelation is, like you said, it's kind of opening more and more of an understanding of the true dynamic of the role of Satan and his demons within our lives in that spiritual battlefield. So to me, I would think asking a couple litmus questions are really good. One would be, let's take for what we know of this situation, Paul was deeply concerned. And I think that was really important in the message this week to go, I'm not necessarily, as I'm Paul, I'm not overly concerned necessarily about your health. I'm not concerned about your wealth. I'm not concerned even maybe about your own physical well-being as far as opposition. I'm afraid you're going to ditch your faith.
Yeah.
That's his blinking red light priority. So he's deeply concerned that these new believers are going to keep walking with Jesus, and he wants to get back to them. So we'd say, number one, is what I'm wanting to do something that seems aligned with God's design, God's will? Yeah. We talked about, again, fresh faith requires active assistance. I got to go and see these guys. I got to encourage them. I got to make sure they're still walking with the Lord. That's a very God-honoring posture and behavior.
Yeah.
So number one, what I'm wanting to do would be honoring to God. That's important because if I want to start talking about my parking spot, I'd have to say at best morally neutral, or maybe even more of, well, this is really what I want because I'm on a schedule and whatever. So I've got to ask that first question: is what I'm wanting to do clearly aligned as much as I can understand it with God's will that I do something? So let's say we check that box, yes, that this is true. Paul could easily say, yes, that's important. Then I think it's asking the question of what's in the way. What's in the barrier to that obedience? And I think in our lives, we could find lots of things that are reasonable. And I think even Paul, in other instances, would say, well, maybe it was something that actually God ordained to keep me from, pursuing this objective, that because he was teaching me another lesson I couldn't have learned otherwise.
Yeah.
That's a theme within the epistles.
Or like, I'm pretty sure one of the things that popped up in my head, I was thinking about in Acts, I'm pretty sure Paul says, this is like right when there's the vision he gets of the guy in Macedonia who's like, come to us, we need your help.
Yeah.
But right before that, he says our way was blocked. And I don't think he gives credit to Satan there for that. But just and probably that paired with the dream, he would maybe give more credit to God for that. Like, sure. God blocked my way so that I could go to Macedonia because I was going to go a different direction.
Exactly. I would have been distracted by going to X when God was calling me to Y, and he closed this door. Yeah. We'll use that language a lot. God closed a door. So we'll give God credit for that. And like we said earlier, we wouldn't necessarily say that a closed opportunity was Satan blocking this opportunity. We would go, I don't think that's what God wants.
Had different for me.
Yeah. And we go, that's a viable explanation. And it's a very biblical, it's described numerous times biblically as true. So that'd be another question. Is God in this? Is God actually blocking me from what I think is something he would want me to do? But he's got a different angle for me than what I understand. I think another thing, sometimes I can ask myself the question, am I blocking this? Am I keeping myself from actually following the Lord's will in my life because of other decisions I'm making? Like Paul could have said, man, I really love it. He was either probably writing from either Corinth by this point. Later on in the journey, we see he gets there. I don't think he was writing from Athens, but they were in Athens when he sent Timothy, right? Yeah. That's pretty clear in the text. And so it's like, we really want to see you guys, but man, these Athenian people, they're so lost. They need Christ. I'd love to go, but I feel really it's important to stay, or I just, I'm tired. I don't want to travel anymore, whatever.
Yeah.
Those would be more like decisions that you're making as an individual to say, I don't want to do this. And they might not always be wrong.
Yeah.
It might be like, no, I really am exhausted and need to catch up a bit or whatever. So that's another question.
Another time in different letter, I'm not going to be able to draw the quote here. You might be able to help me. But something along, I wanted to come to you, but a door was opened for effective ministry for me.
In another direction.
And so, and I believe he said, I want to say Romans is where I'm thinking of that from. I've yearned to come and see you, group of believers I've never met before, but a door for effective ministry was open for me. So that would be an example of what you're saying there, where Paul says, there's a really good opportunity here for ministry, so I'm going to focus on that right now. And again, wouldn't credit Satan for, and that's why I can't get to you.
Exactly.
But it's because I've got a door for effective ministry.
And we would say none of these things are sinful.
Yeah.
Right? No one's done wrong. It's just trying to evaluate what's the best next step. And there are other things sometimes that would maybe redirect my focus or just put me in a different direction. However, I love how you're bringing these biblical examples, but in this biblical example, Satan blocked our way.
Yeah.
So Paul had some sort of clarity.
Which must mean it's different than the other two.
Yeah,
right?
and the good news is, as you're looking at these other passages, Paul's experienced them all. So it's not like, no, it's always X.
Yeah.
Because that's back to your point. Sometimes that can just be our one-trick pony.
Yeah.
The reason, and it could be all kinds of things. The reason this isn't working, God isn't in it.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe sometimes. The reason this isn't working is because I just think I have a better option over here. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Or, and this is probably the biggest one for us to consider that we need to be more open to, things aren't working because Satan and his forces are working against me. We just rarely, many of us seem to even think that happens or would credit it that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big takeaway, is to go, man, those three things are all viable. They all have, you've given great biblical examples of when they've happened. And so the question is that to the best of our ability, God, what's going on here?
Yeah.
I really feel like I should pursue X, but for one of these reasons or others we haven't listed, the answer doesn't seem to be going that way. And therefore, I want to redirect. I want to recalibrate. What should I be doing then? And then allow you to lead.
Yeah.
But Paul gives a deep viability to the fact that there is a demonic action that is keeping him and Silas and Timothy, ultimately not Timothy, because he is able to go.
Yeah.
But the point is keeping all three of them from going back to Thessalonica.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting as we're walking through that. It's almost got me, what you're saying is almost got me thinking like, when it comes to, because really what we're talking about here is discernment, right? We're talking about this ability to sense God's leading and direction, and discernment specifically in something that I want to do, but I cannot do.
Yes.
And the answer is not always one thing because of that. It could be because God's closing that door. It could be because God has something better for me to be doing right now. It's a yes, but not yet. Or it could be that Satan is blocking my way. Or like you said, there's likely other options as well. And that's got me thinking, man, that's really interesting, because I think what we do, the reason why we struggle with discernment is we kind of just get into a mode, and it's always one thing, right? And
this is my go-to.
For my reference at the beginning, I've seen some people who are generally not of kind of, you use the word our tribe, generally not of our tribe, but I've seen some people that their go-to in discernment is just, it's always Satan.
Yes.
And our go-to in discernment tends to be something like, well, it's just not God's will, right? That's the one that we go to. Versus, man, that could be God's will at some point, but maybe he's opened the door for something for me. And maybe some of us are generally open to that. And then we're almost never open to, actually, that could be God's will, but Satan's blocking me.
Yeah.
And so that's just an interesting thing. If we're going to be people who can discern what God is up to and where he's leading us, hear that still small voice, right? Like, I love that example of Elijah, and he's not in the wind, and he's not in the fire, and he's not in the earthquake. He's in the whisper. And so if we're going to hear that whisper, then we need to be open to the options, not saying, oh, it's going to be this. If I feel like I'm want to do something, or I'm led to do something and I can't do it, then that just equals, I think that's where we get it messed up in our spirituality, is I find myself so prone to wanting to make it an equation, because then it doesn't require the same level of work as something that's fluid and dynamic. And also, when you have an equation, you can kind of game the equation a little bit too, like you can systematize it and game it a little bit for yourself. So it's never going to be an equation, though.
And an equation actually as well, another reality to it, it helps us feel more in control, right? Because I don't want to be, if I'm honest, I don't want to be subject to God's leadership that is taking me in a way I really don't prefer.
Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily have to think, is this a better opportunity than that for now? I don't want to
definitely don't want to concede
that this is spiritual battle and Satan's somehow involved. So the point is, my formula,
it's more comfortable for it to be, X plus Y equals Z, and just have it be that way all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting key here for us in discernment. It's almost like, if we're going to be people who are discerning what's actually happening and how God's leading, all the options have to be on the table to begin with.
Absolutely.
It can't just be our favorite or the one we're most comfortable with or feel most in control with. And I think that's really challenging for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, even as we've been talking, we kind of see Paul recognize that all options are on the table. And when he's blocked from going to someone, it's not always the same thing.
Yeah. Not only one way why this is happening.
Yeah. And in that zone of discernment for you personally, what's a kind of situation where you have had to exercise discernment or go through that process?
Yeah. And let me even say this before I answer that. Maybe part of the reason, back to why we like a formula, is not only control, but ease and time.
Totally.
Because I think to understand...
Yeah, discernment is hard.
It takes time, right? You're usually, because what it really goes back to is I'm going to be in prayer. I'm going to be seeking God's word. And that's not, well, I thought about it for 10 minutes and I've got an answer. It's like, wait, I've got to really sit in this. And
there's a labor to it.
And some things might be so urgent or immediate, but most things, right? Most things I have the time to discern and process and pray and seek the Lord's, will, rather than just lunge.
Yeah.
But I think we just go, no, this is the way I do it. It's my formula. Here we go. So I think that's a big part of discernment, is giving God the space to not only lead, but even show me what might be in the way. Because I don't know that Paul just came to these conclusions. I think it was in a sequence of prayer and in a sequence of discussion with his ministry team, looking at circumstances, knowing what he knew from God's word. I think he was like, yeah, I think this is what's keeping us from doing that. And again, could state it matter-of-factly because he'd come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
I can state things like, so your question to me, when is discernment? Probably the most current one I've shared a little bit about on weekend services, and that is, I've been back to HGC for almost 3 years. That entire time, finances have been a challenge. And we have, in trying to react to a reality of just some lesser giving than what our budgets have been at, we have tried many things. And we've said, you know what? Sadly, I think it's going to require us to close a campus, which we did in 2023, along with even our staff having their retirement suspended, all kinds of things to get to a dollar amount. 2024, we cut our whole budget by $1 million going into that year. Both pretty significant actions did not create the solution we're hoping for. And so if I'm honest, it hasn't been like a daily frustration, but it is something that just kind of, I go, Lord, and there's so many great things going on at HTC that I'm so encouraged by. But this is that
kind of weighs on you,
that
though.
one area that just doesn't seem that we can get over the hump, that we can get in a place where because we're committed to biblical stewardship. We're not going to be like, well, we're just going to spend money and hope it all works out. It's like, no. Back to, again, we don't own anything. We're managers, and we're trying to manage and steward well what God's given us. Yeah. And when those dollar amounts don't match, we have to keep making cuts so they will. So we're in March. So December, 4 months ago, I was just again processing, like, Lord, I don't know what to do. I don't know how this gets better, because we've been decisive and not just sat on the bench hoping things would change. What are we going to do? And realizing we needed to make yet another deep, response of even potentially laying off staff, which I just hate, and just going, God, I hate this. Like, why can't we just figure this out? And that's, I think, what I had done is I had kept looking at this as a problem to be figured out, as opposed to what happened in December, just being quiet with the Lord. He just kind of showed me, Todd, I have walked you through some things in your life that there was no other way to get your attention. There was no other way to produce that kind of, okay, God, I yield. What do you want? What are you trying to teach me? What am I supposed to grow in? You've brought those seasons in my life before, and as a result, you have ultimately revealed what needed to happen, what needed to change, what was in the way, and I was grateful for it. It was painful. Yeah. I didn't want it. It was a lot longer of a process than I would have wished. But on the other side of it, I've always been, thank you, Lord, because you actually did do something in my soul that needed to be done that couldn't have been done any other way. So I thank you for it. So maybe this is that. Maybe this idea in the discerning process isn't that somebody's being disobedient. It isn't that we're just spending recklessly. It isn't that this is judgment somehow on us. Yeah. I think it's, God, these numbers aren't consistently are not matching. What of that? And now, after kind of knocking my head against the wall for a while, coming to this place of discernment to go, okay, I yield. Whatever needs to happen, God, we want to be obedient to, because we believe stewardship is a ongoing calling, not just a seasonal thing. But in that, whatever you're going to teach us through making tough decisions, we're going to trust you that that's valuable, that that's what you have for your church in this season, and that we're going to learn something we couldn't have learned any other way. So that's probably the most current, on the tip of my tongue, current discernment thing I'm walking in.
Yeah, that's such a good example, because it would be so easy to see through the lens of this has just been a continued problem, even feeling defeated. This isn't getting fixed. We've made 2 big decisions to try to fix this or help this, and it's not getting fixed. But almost the fact that it's not getting, quote, fixed, to set off some sort of a bell that says, maybe God's actually up to something, and maybe this isn't, like you said, it's not judgment, but maybe it's discipline. and maybe the Lord's leading us in a direction. I think it's interesting in Jesus's letters to the 7 churches in Revelation, some of them are up to no good in some different areas and things like that. And he says, like, deal with this or I will come to you, and in those letters. And that is not a good kind of come to you. That's not the kind of Jesus coming to you that you want. He's coming in judgment for those. And what's interesting to me about what that reveals, because then there's others where he's like, continue in this, and same idea, I'll come to you. And so it's this, there's a good Jesus coming to you as well, right? And so it's just an interesting thing that I see in those letters about almost the kind of dynamic relationship a local church, a whole body of believers has with our Lord.
Yeah.
And he is not unaware, and he is not like removed and detached. He's very interested in the daily ongoings of these local bodies that are his body, you know? And so it's just an interesting thing to think, man, is there something that the Lord is leading us to, and like, and do this, and I'll come to you, the good kind of come to you, you know? And I think that response to obedience, that's the kind of thing as a church we could get around in a season that's hard, and say, okay, this is hard and difficult, what we're going through, but we actually believe these steps of obedience, these are going to lead to the Lord's favor. And it's not, definitely not, you guys have done such a good job of saying this, it's certainly not because God doesn't have enough to fund what's going on here.
Absolutely.
There is more intentionality or purpose behind it. But that's a really interesting example, because you could totally think through and try to discern through the lens in this season for our church. Is Satan blocking ministry that's happening at HDC? Is that what's going on, you know, in some either level of disobedience or whatever? Is God pointing us maybe in a different direction than if we had the finances, we would go this way, but when we don't have the finances, we're going to almost be forced to go a different way that's actually going to be more effective in ministry. Or is God, that's a great, you know, fourth one to add that we haven't added yet, is God disciplining us where it's not judgment, but it's everything that bears fruit, he prunes, you know? And so is this a season of pruning and discipline so that we can be a stronger and healthier church going forward? So, and I think it's such a difficult process to what you were saying earlier before you shared that, of embracing discernment, because you really, to seek discernment from the Lord, you really embrace the fact that you're not in control.
Yeah.
Right. I think about, we like read these stories in the Old Testament about discernment that I don't think we really like think about all the way through. Like there's times when there's an enemy just like right over there, and David's like, give me the ephod. And he sits there and he's like, Lord, what should I do? And and sometimes even like deals with the Lord. If they do this, then we'll do this. And if you actually put yourself in his sandals and you think about being somebody who's about to maybe go to war or not go to war, who's sitting right next to him as he's making that decision, you're thinking, we're really making this decision just based off of like you and
that guy with that thing.
Yeah. Like you're like, no way, you know, like that's a scary moment.
Yeah.
And you are really embracing, I'm not in charge and I'm not in control, which is why I think we struggle to embrace discernment, because embracing discernment has to say, God, I'm open. There's a lot of options, and I'm willing to not commit to any of them yet. And I think that's where that great Old Testament term, waiting on the Lord, comes in, because what I've realized about us today as modern believers, especially of myself, but I think of many of us, is some of us are okay at firing up a prayer about an instance. God, I don't know what to do. Would you help me? And that's it. And then we go right from that and we Google or we call somebody or we start just trying to fix it and figure it out. But it's like, but I did pray first and then I'm going to go do. Yeah. But that going and doing after praying is instinctually saying, and I don't really trust you, and I'm going to put it back in my hands. And so like that's, I think, generally for us, the greatest extent we go to in quote discernment. Discernment is the commitment to, I'm not going to go anywhere else until you respond, because I trust you and I want your input that much, I'm not looking anywhere else until I hear from you. And that's, you don't know how long of a period you're signing up for there to like even hear from the Lord or get clarity there. But that waiting on the Lord is a commitment. Yes. And that's where I think we actually will come to hear from him, come to quiet ourselves enough to hear the still small voice. But that is, that takes a commitment. That's not, something that just happens. It takes a resolve to say, I'm not going to look anywhere else.
Yeah. No, I love the way you frame that. I think in that, go back to even some of the cultural realities that we even talked this last weekend. I haven't had my daughter text back in 2 minutes. What is going on? Is she okay? We don't wait for anything. Or if we do, we hate every moment of it.
Yeah.
Instant. And there's never been a group of people on the planet who've had more instant access to knowledge, to information, answers, to everything than we do now. And that just shows in a good way, helps us, the human heart. We're never satisfied. We can know things like never before, but we're still anxious or we're still impatient or whatever. And so to your point, this is a really kingdom cultural approach to life, is to begin to process part of my walk with the Lord, the kind of dependence I'm called to have on him requires time and patience and waiting. I don't think there's a shortcut around that.
Yeah.
And what we often will do is we won't wait. We'll either make a decision or we'll be forced to wait, and almost like running on the treadmill because we don't want to just sit there. And no one's advocating laziness. This is, like you just said, this is not that.
Yeah.
This is a discipline of prayer, a discipline of petition, a discipline of pausing versus I just got to do something.
Yeah.
And like we said, there are, I think, so few examples of things that require the kind of immediacy now.
Yeah.
You have to make a decision. If we're honest with ourselves, and I learned that from Pastor Jack years ago, most things don't need an immediate response.
That urgency is probably coming from us.
It's self-inflicted.
Not actually the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then I really do have more time than I think I do. And then if I will pursue the Lord with the question of, God, I might even have an idea of what to do here, but I'm not totally sure. I'm putting this before you, right, in a real honest, at the feet of Jesus kind of attitude. And within that, there are some active things I can do. I think a quote that I'm sharing this weekend is one I love. It's so helpful. It rides that tension. You can do nothing before you pray. But after you pray, you can do things.
Yeah.
And not like your example was great. Like, oh, Lord, I really need help and I need an understanding. Okay, here we go. Like, that is a best token.
Yeah.
But the point is, I absolutely must start in prayer. And once I've prayed, there may be some real obvious next steps. It might not be the total answer, but I can do some things, but I shouldn't try to do any of those before I've prayed.
Yeah.
So I think it's a rhythm and a discipline in our lives that do not come naturally to us. And also that we probably have not encouraged ourselves and our church family to engage enough.
Yeah. It's a very uncomfortable. Just recently I've been reading some about this kind of rhythm of discernment. And as I've tried to just even sit and say, okay, I'm going to show up. I'm going to be expectant to hear from God and try to still myself to hear from his still small voice. My mind is just like ping-ponging from thing to thing to thing to thing.
I could do this. What about that?
Yeah, and it's like I'm thinking about the topic, and then I'm on to a totally different topic all of a sudden, and I don't even know how we got there. And I'm like, wait, I'm trying to hear from the Lord, right? And so it's very uncomfortable. And I think it will feel very defeating to start, but it is very worthwhile to start.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was reading that I thought was really helpful was we tend to treat discernment like it's saved for the most gigantic of decisions.
Yeah.
Should I go back to school? Should I move across the country? should we become international missionaries? Those are times for discernment. And then we treat everything else like it's not. When discernment is a discipline, it's a rhythm. And so I don't know how well you can expect to hear from God in the big things when you're never looking to hear from him anywhere else in your life. Because then you're treating him like a, kind of cosmic fortune teller a little bit.
Exactly.
And so it's like, I want to develop, even though it's really going to be awkward and clunky and difficult, I really want to develop a rhythm in my life that says, Lord, I want to have a regular discipline of waiting on you, a regular discipline of sitting in that discomfort, of sitting in the discomfort of how scattered my mind is, and really learning to bring my mind to some peace and stillness before you, and be okay if there's nothing there today, because I'm going to be right back there tomorrow. Yeah. And that discipline and rhythm, what's nice about it is it takes the pressure off. It doesn't have to be this magical moment right here where heaven is torn open and I see clearly. It can be nothing, and it can be a really challenging moment and very scattered in my brain, but that's okay, because it's a discipline and a rhythm. It's not something that I'm just like engaging on a one-off hoping for a magical experience.
Yeah, and like you said, most rhythms or disciplines always start that way. I always tell the story. My freshman year of college, I'm very convicted that I'm not having any kind of just personal prayer life with the Lord daily. And I hear a message in chapel that was very inspiring. Go back to my room, don't have class for like an hour and a half. So I'm just going to pray. And I'm going to go, God, I want to start this, and I want to have this kind of intimacy with you. I start praying for my family. I start praying for my dorm friends and people I have class with. I'm praying for my girlfriend. Her name was Joanna. I'm praying for missionaries I know all around the world. And man, it feels like I've been praying forever. And I look up. It'd been 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh, Lord, we're in for it. This is going to be rough, you know. But the win of that was, and I would tell people, that was the beginning, though, of beginning to have a daily conversation with the Lord. And it wasn't about that it was easy, and it wasn't about that it was even emotionally elating. It was kind of the opposite. It's somewhat discouraging. But again, it's how rhythms begin, and they rarely start awesome. They start more challenging and like, I don't know how I'm ever going to do this. And so that's where you're right. You almost like this whole idea of a rhythm of waiting. Expect it to be clunky and hard. I also, and I totally agree with your point, how am I going to wait on the Lord for a big decision if I've never waited on him for what seems like smaller decisions? So it's something I bring everything. I need to start bringing all these things to him and not just wait for the biggies. The other thing is too, in these big areas, our families walk through some things before of needing discernment. And I would even call those seasons of discernment where when it's a really significant thing.
It's like there's so many options on the table.
Or the stakes are so high, right? When we left HEC to go down the hill, we were in a season of discernment for probably 5 months, longer than that, probably 6 months. And what it does by being patient, and I'm not saying this because we're so great at this, it was a hard thing, but in being patient and not trying to like, this is it, or I don't think this is it, or whatever, but just gathering what seemed to be pieces to that puzzle and just letting them fit together, we came to a conclusion, your mom and I, to go, we feel like it would be disobedient not to go because of the clarity that it seemed that God was providing for us. Now, that's what everyone wants when they're praying for discernment. God, and if our heart is even, I want you to give me discernment for the thing I want my way. It's like, don't even bother. There's
one option on the table. Bless it.
That's not going to happen. But when we go, no, God, we've been in a season of discernment. We've asked, we want your will over anything else. And if it's not to go, don't send us. No problem. But what is it? And what was so powerful is we had so many examples, random things that felt like at times that were feeding into, if it's kind of almost silly now, we need to go. God's made it so clear. And that's kind of a cool thing for people who really would, because let's be honest, sometimes when we say we lack discernment, we don't necessarily mean, so God give that to us. We're just saying we're confused. if I'm saying I lack discernment and therefore I'm going to present myself and whatever this dilemma, this confusion is to the Lord, then by definition, I'm saying I'm really seeking whatever your design is, and I'm open to whatever.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of almost get my heart to that point. But then when I do, man, it's amazing when I will see God begin to add pieces to a clarity.
Yeah.
And I just kind of go, no, I don't think I could be more clear. Sometimes we talked earlier today about like the example of our church's finances. I don't have clarity on what the ultimate thing God's teaching us. I just don't have any better understanding that he's teaching
confidence.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's teaching us something, and I can lean into that and be okay. But because there's been no, whatever we've tried has not solved this dilemma, then it's like, okay, Lord, there must be something else you're after. I don't know what it is, but we're going to wait on you, and we're going to trust that that's what this season is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so good. And one of the things too that I, as we're thinking about this topic of discernment, that Pastor Jack, I think, has been really helpful to both of us in seasons of discernment is making sure that you get specific too.
Yeah.
And I think that's really modeled in Scripture. Like you see, Abraham's servant, when he goes to pick out a wife for, Isaac, who's like, Lord, would it happen exactly this way with whoever you intend for Isaac to marry? And it does. And it's a very specific set of details.
Yeah. Have her bring, water my camels, offer me water, have her invite me to her home, all these things.
Yeah. And so it's like a very specific list. And you've got Gideon with do just on the fleece and do on everything but the fleece. And so you've got these moments of, God, I have faith that you could be calling me to this, but my faith, I've got small faith. And so I need you to help me see. And so would you give me some clarity? And sometimes in like opportunities, like I remember looking at the opportunity to come to HDC, Pastor Jack encouraged Sky and I to put together a list that was like, these are the things that really matter to us in a church, in a role, in a city that we might move to, and so on and so forth. And these are the things that really matter, and these are the things that kind of matter. And the list maybe had 8 things on it or something like that. And I think 7 were true of the opportunity at HDC, not in Orange County. So bummer. But I mean, everything else was there, and it was like, okay, Lord, this feels like this is pretty clear. Yeah. And specifics helped us get there.
Yeah.
I heard somebody recently in a teaching say that vague prayers tend to get vague answers. That's good. Specific prayers tend to get specific answers. Yeah. And so in discernment, I feel like specifics matter. Like I really need the specifics. And so I want to get super specific in what I'm praying about and not just say, Lord, I'm confused. Would you show me your will? Right? Like that's going to be so open-ended and vague.
Yeah. Because how can I track that?
Yeah. I can't make it heads or tails of an answer to that or a non-answer to that, because in all actuality, God's probably answering that. Yeah. But it's like, so I'm just supposed to assume whatever goes forward from here is your will? How do I make sense of that? And so, Lord, if it is your will, would you show me blank? And if it's not, would you show me blank? Right?
Absolutely.
Like, let's get really specific about the way that you might lead me. So I feel like that's huge when we're entering into this area of discernment. But man, so much here as we're talking for us to grow in. I think we like to be very intellectual in our approach to our relationship with God. We like to be very systematic in a lot of ways. And there's some benefit to that, because some systematic approaches to God lead to like a very continuous result. And so there's some benefit to being rigid and intellectual in some areas of our faith, but we don't want to just be that in all areas of our faith. And so we want to embrace some of this fluidity and dynamic nature that comes to our relationship with God. And this is an uncomfortable one, but man, such a good one, because this whole, what Paul is saying here in 1 Thessalonians, the whole thing changes if it's not God's will for him to come to them, or if God is leading him to a different spot, or if Satan is blocking his way. I would argue that the words that are going to come following, when he's really concerned about them, he would not be concerned if it wasn't God's will for him to come to them. But because it was Satan who was blocking his way,
adversary.
He's thinking there's spiritual warfare going on here. And now I'm concerned about, but that changed his approach and his posture and his feelings about the situation. That matters, like getting that right. And so for us in our own life, it matters to get right and to understand what we're up to and what God's up to and what things are happening in a certain season of our life, so we know how to respond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great point of, because when he had clarity, it wasn't God kind of closing a door. It wasn't because he had a better opportunity. His heart was so for them, but it was Satan blocking. Then it's like, well, he's always up to no good.
Yeah.
That's a totally clear understanding. What is he doing while I can't get back there? And that fuels, as we talked last week, I think this really sincere fear that they're going to abandon their faith.
Yeah.
And Satan is doing everything, obviously, to do that. So he has right reason to be so deeply concerned.
Yeah. Whereas if it was God's will, it'd be like, bless you, and I hope it goes well.
God's got you.
Yeah,
be okay.
It's going to be good. Yeah. That's so good. Well, I hope this has been an encouraging conversation for you. I've been encouraged by it. It's fun this almost element of discernment we didn't even really talk about this weekend, but it came up in a really cool way here. So I hope it's been some good takeaways here for you. And as always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you get future videos. And let us know something you're taking away from this podcast or the weekend message there in the comments as well. That's all we have for this week. We'll catch you guys next week on Tangible Takeaways.